to Passport Necessary. I am Layla Gentil.
And I'm Marcus Rosati.
And today we're going to be getting into the interesting and very detailed topic of identity. So for anyone who hasn't been to or listened to Passport Necessary yet, Passport Necessary is a podcast that delves into what it's like being a third culture kid, which we will henceforward use TCK, and how it's affected our adult life, how we lived growing up, and which definitely ties into identity, which is going to be a very fun topic to get into. So Marcus, I guess a big part of being a TCK is the feeling of being an outsider.
Yes.
Which I know you definitely dealt a lot with being a Westerner living in Japan.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because the thing is that Japan, with it being sort of like a relatively closed society, they don't have high levels of immigration. They don't necessarily let so many people in, and they have some very specific ideas about who is not Japanese. Mm-hmm. It does mean that if you are white or a Westerner, you're definitely not considered to be Japanese at any point. So that does mean that you're always constantly perceived as a foreigner, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But you are aware of being outside the society in a certain sense. Mm-hmm. Which does mean that you get some perspectives on it that maybe people who actually live there all the time don't get. Mm-hmm. You can see how the society functions and works. And then also when you move back from that society to a society that is supposed to be more like your own, safely in quotation marks, mm-hmm. You again are able to sort of like see things from an outside perspective that people probably don't see in their own lives, mm-hmm. which is interesting.
Yeah, being an outsider within your own, what should be insider culture.
Yeah, but it's theoretically your community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely something that I know I've struggled with. It's funny because you don't necessarily think about being a TCK constantly, but it's kind of always there whether you really are thinking about it or not, because I think whether it comes to food or like cultural references or pop culture or even music, literature, like there's stuff that you come into or you meet every day that sometimes will remind you like, oh, I don't know what this is, or oh, I would know what this was in a different culture, or like I don't know what to do within this social interaction. So it's weird. It's like you don't think about being an outsider all the time, but at the same time you are always an outsider because you haven't been within your mother culture, all the time because you've been in other places.
Yeah, because I do sometimes, I don't know if this happens to you, but you get people sort of like referencing something and they'll say, oh, do you remember such and such? And you just go, no. And they say, well, why don't you remember it? I wasn't here for it, so I don't know. And then they go, oh, right, yeah, I just remembered.
Yep, that happens to me.
You didn't grow up here.
Oh, that happens to me all the time. I'll have friends who are like, oh, well, there was this TV show, this reference. I'm like, I have no clue what you're talking about or like who this character is. That's actually, funnily enough, how my partner and I realized we had a little bit of an age gap, because he would always make references to things and he assumed like, oh, well, you don't know it's because you were living overseas. And then there was one day where he made like a reference to a pop culture thing and was like, oh, I don't know what that is. And he was like, how do you not know what that is? Like, you definitely were in the US when this happened. And I was like, well, I was this year's old. He was like, wait a minute. How old are you? And then at the time we like realized we had a little bit of an age gap, but it was a funny moment where it was like, it's not lack of knowledge because I wasn't in the country. It's a lack of knowledge because I was literally a baby.
It's a thing though, isn't it? I suppose it's like people say that people have to make a lot of assumptions about life in order to get through it. So I suppose the thing is, if you're not necessarily aware of somebody being from somewhere different, or it's like age differences or whatever, you kind of just make assumptions about your own life and then kind of put them onto other people, not deliberately, but like we make certain assumptions in our society and culture, it's an interesting one. Again, it's not like being an outsider, you notice that in people.
Yeah.
The assumptions and the sort of things like, oh, this is normal, this is what you do, this is how you behave. and it's sort of like, well, for us that would not be normal,
Mm-hmm.
or for us it seems less obvious.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, there are certain things that I had to relearn when I came back to the
Yeah.
States, or things that like have stuck with me from living in other countries that, you know, I took it as normal or for granted when I was there. And then when I had to move somewhere else, I was like, okay, got to learn a whole new system again. So it's when you're traveling, your brain is kind of in the mindset of, oh, well, I'm an outsider, so I need to always be aware and always pay
Hmm.
attention. And then
Yeah.
there's like a weird part when you're in your mother country where it's like, I'm a, I'm an outsider here, but I'm technically also an insider because this is my country. So I
Yeah.
guess like I need to fit in, but also I will never fit in. It's this really strange dynamic.
Yeah. It, it is a very peculiar thing. It's almost, it's really difficult to describe it to someone who doesn't understand it. It's like that. I think the thing is you meet people, you know, when you're a real outsider, when you meet people who think of themselves as outsiders,
Mm-hmm.
and then you're even further outside the outsider position, and that's just, it's not even a choice. It's just you don't even have to try to be that outsider. You just are that
Mm-hmm.
outsider.
Mm-hmm.
I've been thinking about it recently. Sometimes I've met people who, you know, like kind of slightly gothy types and stuff like that. They look at me and go, "Oh yeah, he's definitely going to be like us," and then you just go, "I have no idea what you people are referencing. You, you're not. We're not the same, you know,
Yeah.
even though I do look quite gothic at times. It's just like we don't share the same stuff. We're just different." And it
Mm-hmm.
confuses people, and I think it upsets some people as well, because they kind of think, "Oh, he's an outsider, he must understand me." It's like, not necessarily. No.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
It's
not
interesting.
not every outsider shares the exact same experience. We share an outsider experience, but that doesn't
Hmm.
mean that it's the exact same experience.
Yeah, exactly. It's useful though, because it does remind you to sort of, I think it maybe in some ways helps you to be a bit more tolerant of people,
Mm,
'cause
absolutely.
you think things through. Like if somebody does something, you just kind of go, "It doesn't really bother me." You know, you're not upset by things so much.
I think for me, it's also there's always an awareness of like not everyone automatically knows the context of what's going on, and you shouldn't assume
Yeah.
that everyone knows exactly what's happening in that moment. That's why I've had people who, when I do projects or I've worked with them within a job setting, I've had people who said like, oh, you're very communicative, like you definitely you sometimes over communicate, you're very
Right.
descriptive of what you need, what you want, and like what the situation is. And the reason I do that, I'm realizing, you know, as I've gotten older, is that I do that because I don't assume that everyone knows what's going on in the situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because a lot of times I don't know what's going on in the situation. I would love to have someone who could just come up to me and be like, "Hey, by the way, this is what's going on," and that would be like, "Thank you so much," so that I can move forward with my life.
It's made everything so much easier. Why didn't you just say?
I know. Stop assuming. Just give
Mm.
people context clues so that they know what's going on.
Yeah.
um, and then a part of that is a term that I learned from one of my best friends who's also a TCK is imposter syndrome, which is
Oh yeah.
very closely tied to being an outsider. So for anyone who doesn't know, imposter syndrome is this feeling of being an imposter even within a situation where you know what is happening. Specifically when you're in a position of authority or you're leading something and you get the sense of I'm doing it wrong, or someone's gonna catch me and then they'll get rid of me or they'll fire me or they'll take me off this project, whatever it is. But it's this definite sense of like I don't belong and someone's gonna find out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I definitely get that. It's it's a strange one, because you could be doing something that you've been doing hundreds and hundreds of times, and then you're constantly checking yourself to see. It's just like, well, am I doing it right? Am I doing it wrong?
Mm-hmm.
'Cause I work as like body piercing and stuff like that, and it's a constant thing of like just checking yourself, kind of going, am I doing this right? You know, am I really good enough to do this?
Mm-hmm.
That sort of thing. There is that there.
Yeah, and it's strange because like you've been training in it, you've been working at it for a long time, and it's not
Hmm.
like you're a novice. Like you definitely have become skilled within it. Like everyone's of course going to keep learning and growing. That's
Yeah,
a
exactly.
natural part of the human experience, but like you could definitely be considered someone who knows what the hell they're doing within their job.
Yes, yes. I've been doing it for about 7 years now, so on and
Yeah.
off. So, but even then, even so, I still get that thing of like thinking, I'm going to do something wrong and I'm going to get sacked. That kind of thing does come up quite a lot. It's got better over the past year, but like for the first 2 years in my job, I was always worried that something was going to go wrong and that was going to be it.
Mhm. Yeah.
Even though most jobs aren't like that, but I just felt like that all the time.
Oh yeah.
Um,
No, it happened to me too. There were so many moments where I was like, I would feel like someone would come up to me and be like, "You lied to get into this job and you're fired," or like
mm,
crazy stuff where it's like, "There's no reason for me to think like this. There's no reason for me
yeah,
to assume that people are going to be like, that's it, you're done for. We're getting rid of you." And it's like, why do I think this? Oh, because I never feel like I truly belong.
yeah,
It all comes full circle.
I suppose it also kind of has a thing to do with maybe slight social anxiety that you might feel from actually sometimes with people moving in and out of your life so much, especially when you're in like international schools or have
Mm-hmm.
a family that moves around a lot. I think there's a bit of social anxiety because you're constantly having to learn and relearn your social environment, your social situation, and stuff like that. And so, I think for me, maybe like a lot of it does. You become very good at getting on with people,
Mm-hmm.
but you also become extremely nervous of people as well. I think because
Oh,
it really matters that you've got to get on with people while you're with them for short periods of time. You might only know someone for a year or two while you're in school, but it matters that you get on with them.
oh my gosh, yeah, that is a huge thing for me, and it's actually something
Mm.
that I've been trying to work on. Because my partner noticed it, and then I started really noticing that I was doing it a lot. Where like I get so worried about other people's assumptions of me, and not that they
Hmm.
necessarily have a bad view of me. Like I haven't had anyone who's come up to me and they're like, "You're a bitch" or whatever. Like that's never
Mm.
happened. But there is like I focus so much on how other people see me and interpret me and look at me that
Yeah.
it's almost paralyzing because I get
Mm.
so stuck in my head and into this like spiral of like, what do they think of me? How am I going to do this? How do they perceive me when I do this? That I sometimes just don't even do the thing that I wanted to do in the first place because I get so stuck on how people view me. And that's
Yeah.
absolutely connected to moving around so much. You constantly meet new people and you want to put on a good first impression. And so all you constantly think about is like, how are other people going to perceive me?
Yes, and I suppose that again kind of like goes right back into the identity thing, right down to the core of it, because you don't want your identity to be misrepresented or misinterpreted in a certain sense.
Mm-hmm. But then
It,
it's also like you're, in a way, it's almost performative because when you're meeting
mm,
someone new, you want to be like, quote unquote, the best version of yourself, end quote. So you kind of always put yourself in this certain light. And so then there's this weird moment where it's like, is this really me? Am I performing
mm,
myself? Am I doing too much? Am I doing too little? Like, I constantly am thinking about my identity and how I put it out there for other people to see,
yeah.
which I don't recommend for anyone to do it at the level that I do it. But it is something that I notice that I do. And I think it is definitely tied to moving as much as I have into all the different countries I've been in because I just constantly have to be ready to meet new people and get to know them. And my hope is to, be friendly and have people like me. But I mean, that's not a reality that is tenable for anyone.
No, you can't win them all, as they say.
Oh, yeah, no, but that's my hope and dream. Go up to every person. I'm like, you're going to like me, even
Yeah.
if it debilitates me socially and inside.
Yeah, because I do find that I do sometimes have quite a lot of problems with that. I have real problems with saying no to people. I don't know why.
Oh, I have the same problem. I really do, especially when I was in college. I would say yes to so many things to the point where it was like I physically could not do all the things that I was saying yes to. But I was
Yeah.
just so afraid that if I said no, no one would give me another project because I work in
Right,
theater,
yeah.
so everything is based on human relations. And so I was terrified that if I said, no, I can't do this, that they would go, right, well, we'll never ask you again, which is, that
Right, yeah.
makes no sense. But that was where my brain was at. So I would say yes to everything to the point where
Mhm.
I couldn't do everything. But I tried.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been like that. I've been there.
Yeah.
It's just one of those things. It's really difficult sometimes. I don't know. I suppose it does kind of come down to a social anxiety thing to an extent.
I think, yeah, I could definitely agree that that's some of it. I think it also, for me, I think it's also been affected because of all the different cultures I've lived in. It's sometimes I change myself or I'll alter myself slightly because based on different cultures that I lived in, there's certain ways of interacting with people, like how
Mm.
social to be, how friendly to be, how physically close to be. So like there are certain things that you learn to pick up on when you've lived in different places, um, and so then your brain is overthinking like, oh well, if we were here, this is how you should interact, and if you were in this country, this is
Yeah.
how you should interact. And it's like, well, I'm in the United States, so how the hell how do I interact here? I'm like, what's the norm here? But I haven't lived
What's
here for most of my life.
yeah. You do sort of go, well, what's the right thing to do?
I don't know
Uh,
if there is a right thing to do.
no, probably not. It's funny because I think as you start to get older and a bit more comfortable with yourself as well, that you start to worry less. I think because you just realise that even the local culture doesn't necessarily get everything right either. So you just take the bits of what you've learned and use it. You kind of become what I describe as a cultural magpie.
Mm-hmm.
You take the bits of things that work best for you and just carry on with them. And if people find them strange, then they're just going to find them strange. There's not much you can do about it.
I agree. I think that's definitely a thing that you learn, and as you get older, I have it in my head. It's just putting it into practice in my everyday life.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
what I'm
exactly.
working on now. um, so then the thing I was interested in talking about was identity in terms of gender, because
Hmm.
I'm a cis woman. I present female, and I have my whole life, and I think that has been like the way I view myself as a woman has been kind of affected based on the different countries I've lived in. I was
Yeah.
curious if you, for you, how has living in Japan affected your view of yourself?
I think the thing is that for Japanese men, the thing is there are a lot of they do take care of their appearance quite a lot. So the thing is that being male and taking care of your appearance in particular ways is not considered that strange over there.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in Britain, it definitely is. It is seen as being vain, effeminate almost, and I remember meeting people who were really upset by it, and I couldn't really completely understand it because this isn't sort of like even sort of like gender fluidity or anything like that. It's just a different way of working within a specific gender.
Mm-hmm.
It's you know being male in Japan as a thing is it's just like yeah you can be more, you can take care of your appearance more.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter as much. Whereas what you would wear in Japan would be considered to be kind of effeminate here to an extent.
Mm-hmm.
Some people have seen stuff that show them films from Japan. They go, yeah, the men are really sort of effeminate. It's like you don't see it as effeminate.
No, it's not considered feminine within a Western context. It's considered
No.
masculine within a Japanese context.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing, is just the way it sort of works. And I'm one of these people. I've worn makeup since I was 14.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, the thing that again, like being an outsider in a country, you just realise you're outsider anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So you can kind of get away with a bit more. And I think in Japan they're less worried about this sort of stuff, just so long as you don't show it off too much. You can do it, just don't make a fuss about it.
Right.
With a lot of things, it seems to be the way, as far as I understand it. A lot of stuff is hidden, and everybody knows it goes on, but they don't mind just so long as it's hidden.
Right.
Like,
Which isn't always healthy, but it is a certain
no.
way of dealing with things that are either counterculture or subculture.
Yeah.
I think for me, what's interesting is that I I've always been aware of being female, um, But depending on the different country that I was in, there were different ways of like what I would say would be like performing femininity.
Right. Yeah.
Like in Japan, performing femininity is like women have naturally higher. Well, they put on a higher voice. Like women, when they speak to men, they'll have a higher voice range than when they speak to other women. The way that they dress is very. There's a lot more dresses, like actual dresses, a lot more very careful makeup, but it's
Yeah.
what in the West we would call like natural makeup, where it almost looks like they're not wearing anything.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be very subtle. And I remember when I was in Japan, I was like I have this very strong memory of when I was there. I was in the 10th grade, so I was getting ready to leave and go to France. And I remember a guy coming up to me thinking that I was a college student, and he was trying to get my number. I was like,
Oh dear.
I was like, I'm so sorry. I'm in high school. I'm a 10th grader. And he was like, oh, I'm so sorry. And then disappeared. Because I think for
Whoops.
him, he saw me as much older than I was. And so he
Right. Yeah.
assumed, like, oh, she's a college student. It is okay to ask her. But he wasn't pushy. He was very, like, oh, you are young. I'm going to run away now. And he, like, left me alone. Whereas there were multiple instances when I was in Paris where I think in Japan, I got away for a long time with not being sexualized. If I was, it was all in their head. It wasn't being said out loud. Whereas in Paris, there were many times where like I was reminded that not only am I a woman, but there are other people who sexualize me and who will let me know that they are sexualizing me. That
Yeah.
was one of the first times I got catcalled. Was when I started living in Paris, and I was a junior and senior in high school. I was like, I am underage. I have no interest in sex. Please leave me alone. Like, I do not want to talk to you, 40-year-old man. Like, please
No.
go away. But it was something that I think I got very lucky being a teenager in Japan. A good part of my teenage years, learning to grow into myself and figure out what I wanted and needed and how I viewed myself as a cis woman. I think I got very lucky living there because it meant that I could do it without constantly being sexualized. Whereas once I got to Paris and then everywhere I've been since then, being in a Western culture, not only do you get sexualized, they let you know. They're like,
Yeah.
they'll catcall you, wolf whistle, like people have followed me. I had to learn very quickly, like being a woman isn't always safe.
No. Yeah. I mean, I think the thing is also in Japan is one of the things as because I mean there's a slightly different problem that you have if you're a man is that basically people want to fight you.
Yes.
In Western societies, much more. In Britain, they do that, and so your problem is that, and the way that people get into fights in the UK is not a one-on-one thing. What they'll do is like several men will come up to you when you're on your own, and then they try and pick on you. It's not an individual one person on one-on-one thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of gang mentality.
And it's far more confrontational, whereas in Japan,
Yeah.
like that if that happens, I've never seen it, I've never heard it. It's definitely something that is not, it's not made public.
Yeah.
Like if you have issues with people, that's something that you deal with more within a private setting.
Yeah, exactly. You're not going to start fights on the street.
No, whereas
Which
absolutely
does
in the
happen.
US we do that.
Yeah.
And for no
Happens
reason.
in the UK as well. I definitely, it's like you do get people shouting stuff at you in cars and stuff like that, and you just kind of go, "What on earth is the matter with you? Have you got nothing better to do?"
Mm-hmm.
It's different because obviously, if somebody's passing by in a car, they're not going to stop and get out. Generally speaking, I mean, so you just you can avoid them or ignore them as much as you like, but it's different. I think, especially in pubs and stuff, you do sometimes feel a little bit like there are a few situations where I've come across people I just thought, you know what, probably best to get out of here.
Yeah. And that's unfortunate. And I've been in that situation too, where it's like I know that my part of my identity is a danger for me and I need to get out. which sucks. It shouldn't
Yeah.
be a situation that you're put in, but it is a situation that happens quite a bit.
Yeah.
And when you get used to being in a culture, like learning to be aware of my surroundings at the level that you need to be in the West was a real big change for me coming from Japan, because I like, being honest, I got used to feeling safe in Japan. Like,
Japan is incredibly safe.
yeah, I never really worried about my physical safety, which, you know, is a huge privilege. And I never downplay that that was a huge load off my mind, especially as a teen when I was growing up there. Yeah, it just kind of sucks.
Yeah, it does. I mean, it's a shame. It's funny. I'm not sure why Western societies are a bit more like this, but I think it is more acceptable to be more aggressive. It is more acceptable to be more. Maybe it's because we're more allowed to be more outspoken.
Mm-hmm.
And that's maybe part of the thing is that maybe there is a downside to being more outspoken, is that outspoken people sometimes are just nasty.
Yeah, just
I mean,
because
there
you
is
can
that.
say something doesn't mean you need to say it.
It's true, but I mean, you know, people are entitled to say things. That's the problem. I mean, that's, you know, it's one of those things, getting a balance between working out whether it's worth dealing with a few absolute idiots, and having everybody else allowed to say what they want to say, or whether you just want to stop people talking, and, you know.
Yeah,
You
and
can't
then
really do that.
repressing what you want to say.
Yeah, exactly.
So the last thing I wanted to get into, which I thought might be interesting, is, I don't know for you where you stand, but for me, being part of the queer community is now that I'm aware of it, it's a bigger part of my identity. I'm bisexual. I came to my full understanding of that once I was in university, but I think I kind of had hints of it within my life. But I just, either I was unaware, or I'm very lucky. I have parents that are incredibly supportive and who have always been outspokenly supportive of me and the queer community. So I never felt scared of, you know, my identity in that way, of my sexuality. Also, partly being half French, learning about sex and sexuality came at a very early age. Like, watching French movies, almost everyone's naked at some point in the movie, so like it wasn't weird to me. But I do remember once I got into college and I started realizing, like, oh, I've liked kind of everyone. Like, I don't have like a particular type. I've liked men, I've liked women, I've liked people who are non-gender conforming or who are non-binary, and I have found once I realized that, I realized like how much that was affected by living in these other countries, which is interesting because, at least, you know, growing up, I was a kid in a lot of the countries I lived in, but like in Guatemala, people, not that I knew of, had a very big community, but I'm sure it was there. And then living in Japan, I know there is a queer community, but it's not very outspoken. It's not very like big or out there. It's very much like a subculture, in the sense of like, you don't know about it unless you're part of it. But I think the thing that I got lucky with was the school that we went to, that you and I went to. There were a couple people who not only were they part of the community, but they were very out and kind of proud about it. And I think that helped me, because when I got to my French high school, it wasn't that it was the opposite, but there was definitely the sense of like, if you were part of the queer community, do not talk about it, do not be open about it, you will get made fun of. And one of the like big moments for me was when I was in high school. I got into a huge argument with a kid in one of my classes because he was saying there were rumors going around that there was a kid in our graduating class who was gay, and he was like, well, you know, as long as he doesn't hold hands with someone or kiss someone, like, I don't care, like, he can do whatever he wants. I was like, so you're really cool with all the other straight people who hold hands, who slobber all over each other in front of my locker to the point where I cannot open my locker, and it's just so performative and gross, but you're not okay with someone holding hands with someone of the same gender. And they were like, no, I don't like that. I was like, okay, well, how does this affect you? How is this going to impact your life? And they were like, well, I just don't want to see it. I'm like, okay, but you see people who love each other very physically and amorously every day, but you're upset that this is happening. Like, we got into a huge fight over it. Like, we were like yelling at each other in a classroom. And there was a part of it at the end where I was like, I am so mad. Like, I'm so mad at him, and I feel hurt. Like, I felt hurt. And I realized as I got older, I was like, I was hurt because he was basically denying a part of my identity. And it made me so mad.
It's funny because I mean, people sort of like, just because, you know, you wear makeup and stuff like that, people assume that you must be sort of like either homosexual or bisexual, because I'm not. But the thing is that it's amazing how angry some people can get by the idea that you might be. It's so strange because they can be quite aggressive, and they think they're being really funny, and it's kind of like, it's not funny, you know. And the one thing is that a lot of people will say things to try and be hurtful. I think as you get a bit older, you realise is that people say things to be hurtful, and you just kind of go, heard that one before, have you got another one? You know, heard that one as well, have you got another one? Because people, they do it less so now, actually. I haven't had any problems for, I don't think I've had anybody really be nasty to me or kind of intrusive for a while. I think it might be sort of partly to do with the fact that I don't go to as many clubs and pubs as I used to. That might be part of it, because I don't actually enjoy those environments, because you do feel a bit sort of like people aren't going to get it, or, you know, it's an interesting one, especially with that sort of thing, especially sort of like within, again, sort of European/North American cultures, as people can be more outspoken and do have some strange ideas. But I think, you know, things are getting better and are being turned around, and more stuff is more acceptable now. Like, I see a lot more young men wearing makeup now, and I just kind of think that's good.
Yeah,
and they're perfectly happy to walk around, and they seem pretty safe, which is what you want.
Yeah, I want to see more people able to not only speak their truth, but live in their truth, because of that's who they are and that's their identity, and it's not going to change, or if it changes, that's because they've learned more about themselves. And I think a big part of being an outsider is that automatically, like, I know I'm not part of the in-group automatically because of the way I live, because of where I come from. And then add on to that, I'm a woman, so automatically, especially within Western culture or American culture, I know I'm not going to get into certain things, or I'm going to automatically be pushed aside. And then being part of the queer community, it's like, well, that's just another thing. Like, it's just another thing that's going to add on to the so it's one way or another, I'm an outsider, and you could list all the reasons I'm an outsider, but I'm an outsider no matter what. So it's like, this is just another thing. It's not something that, you know, is going to make or break me.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah, I know completely what you mean. I mean, the thing is, it does mean, I think we kind of touched it at the beginning, really, just like, you know, it does give you a certain kind of freedom, because you know you're an outsider. You know that that's just the way it's going to be. Yeah. No matter where you go. And that's the other thing I think is a key thing, is no matter where you go, that's going to happen.
Oh, yeah. No matter if I'm here, if I'm in another country, if I go visit my parents wherever they are next, like, it does not matter. I'm always going to be an outsider. It's always going to happen. And then keep in mind, like, we're both white. So our experience within these countries are going to be very different than people who are a person of color, or who are in any way a darker skin tone, because different countries deal with that in very different ways. Which actually I'm very excited. I have one or two people I've reached out to who want to, you know, do an interview with us, and they are within, they are a person of color, and I'm like, yes, I want to get your experience, because I know that their experience is going to be so different than mine. And that's kind of the point of doing this podcast, is to, you know, get to hear everyone's experience within different countries.
Yeah, and it does mean that, as you know, more people can hopefully use it as a resource, and at least sort of like hear that there are other people who have similar experiences, which is nice to know.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, we kind of talked about identity today.
Yeah.
So if you guys have any questions, please feel free to leave it in the comments below. You could also reach out to me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is at Layla Gentil. That's LeylaGentil. And you could also, you know, just shout out into the void. You never know. Maybe we'll hear you. I don't know. But yeah, this was Passport Necessary. Until next time,
See
goodbye.
you later.
See
Bye.
ya.